The small fishing village of Santa Rosa had exactly one traffic light, 2 churches, and a diner that served the best fish tacos anyone had ever tasted. It wasn't the kind of place where dreams were supposed to come true. It was the kind of place where people worked hard, went to bed tired, and woke up the next morning to do it all over again. Maria Santos knew this routine better than anyone. Every morning at 5, she'd wake up to the sound of fishing boats heading out to sea. Her father would already be gone, and her mother would be in the kitchen, packing lunches for the crew. By 6, Maria would be on her way to the diner where she worked the breakfast shift. By 2 in the afternoon, she'd catch a few hours of sleep before starting her evening shift at the same place. This had been her life for the past 3 years. Ever since her mother got sick, the medical bills kept piling up, and someone had to keep the family afloat. Her younger brother was still in school, and her father's fishing income barely covered the basics. So Maria worked, and worked, and worked some more. But there was something else that kept Maria going, something nobody at the diner really knew about. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, between her shifts, she would slip into the old stone church at the edge of town. There she would meet Mrs. Rodriguez, the church organist who had been playing music for nearly 50 years. Mrs. Rodriguez had heard Maria humming while cleaning the church one afternoon. It was a simple melody, nothing fancy. But the way Maria's voice carried through the empty halls made the old woman stop what she was doing. She'd heard thousands of voices in that church over the decades, but this one was different. This one had something special. Child. Mrs. Rodriguez had said that day, "Do you know what kind of gift you have?" Maria had shrugged, embarrassed. "I just like to sing, that's all." From that day on, Mrs. Rodriguez took it upon herself to teach Maria everything she knew. They couldn't afford real lessons, and Maria didn't have time anyway. But twice a week, for 1 precious hour, Maria would learn. She'd practice breathing techniques while standing between the wooden pews. She'd learn to read music by candlelight when the church couldn't afford to keep all the lights on. She'd sing scales until her voice grew stronger, clearer, more controlled. Maria never told her parents. They loved her, but they were practical people. Music wasn't going to pay the bills. Music wasn't going to save their house or cover her mother's treatments. Music was a luxury they simply couldn't afford to think about, so Maria kept her secret. Singing only when no one was listening, dreaming only when no one could see. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Maria was wiping down tables at the diner when Rosa, one of the waitresses, came running in with her phone held high. "Look at this. Look at this." Rosa was practically shouting. The other waitresses gathered around as Rosa showed them a video on her screen. It was an advertisement for the National Voice Competition, one of the biggest talent shows in the country. The grand prize was $50,000 and a recording contract. But more than that, winners got the chance to perform at real concert halls, to work with real musicians, to actually make a career out of singing. "Can you imagine?" Rosa said, her eyes wide with excitement. $50,000. That could change someone's life. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. $50,000 would cover her mother's treatments for the next 2 years. It would give her brother a chance to go to college. It would mean her father wouldn't have to work on that boat until his hands bled and his back gave out. But just as quickly as the hope flared up, reality came crashing down. The competition was being held in the city nearly 200 miles away. The application fee alone was $50, money Maria simply didn't have. And even if she could afford it, how would she get there? When would she have time to audition? What would she even wear to something like that? She went back to wiping tables, trying to push the dream out of her mind. But Rosa had other ideas. That night, after closing time, Rosa gathered all the waitresses together. Maria was in the back, counting her tips for the day, when they called her out front. "We've been talking," Rosa said, and the other women nodded. "We know you can sing, Maria. We've all heard you humming while you work. Mrs. Rodriguez from the church told me you've been taking lessons with her." Maria felt her cheeks burn red. "It's nothing, really. Just something I do for fun." "Don't give us that." Another waitress, Lucia, cut in. "Mrs. Rodriguez says you have a voice like an angel. She says you could actually win something like this." Before Maria could protest, Rosa pulled out an envelope. We took up a collection. Everyone who works here put in what they could. It's enough for the application fee, the bus ticket to the city, and a little extra for food. Maria stared at the envelope, unable to speak. These women, who worked just as hard as she did, who had their own bills and their own families to worry about, had pooled their money together. For her, I can't, Maria whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I can't take this. Yes, you can, Rosa said firmly. Because if you win, you're going to come back here and buy us all dinner at the fancy restaurant in the next town. Deal. The other women laughed and agreed. Maria took the envelope with shaking hands. The next day, with Mrs. Rodriguez's help, she filled out the application. She recorded a simple video of herself singing in the church. Nothing fancy, just her voice and the old organ. She sent it off and tried not to think about it too much. 3 weeks later, the acceptance letter came. She'd been selected for the preliminary auditions. The date was set for the following month. She would have exactly 3 minutes to sing for the judges. 3 minutes that could change everything. Mrs. Rodriguez intensified their practice sessions. They worked on breathing, on projection, on hitting the high notes with perfect clarity. Maria practiced between shifts, humming scales while she poured coffee, running through difficult passages in her head while she scrubbed dishes. The night before the audition, Maria stood in front of her tiny closet, staring at her clothes. She had exactly one dress that could possibly work. A simple navy blue dress she wore to church on special occasions. It wasn't fancy. It didn't make her look like the sophisticated performers she'd seen on television. But it was clean, and it was all she had. Her mother, watching from the doorway, came over and hugged her tight. "You're going to be wonderful," she whispered. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm so proud of you." At 4 a.m, Maria boarded the bus to the city. She clutched her sheet music in one hand and a paper bag with 2 sandwiches in the other. The bus was mostly empty. Just a few workers heading to early shifts and an old man sleeping in the back as the sun rose over the highway. Maria watched the landscape change from familiar coastal roads to unfamiliar city buildings. Her stomach churned with nervousness and excitement. In just a few hours, she would stand on that stage. In just a few hours, her whole life might change. She had no idea just how right she was. The Grand Theater of the Arts stood like a giant in the middle of the city, all marble columns and golden doors. Maria had seen pictures of it online, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. It made her feel impossibly small. She clutched her folder of sheet music tighter as she walked up the steps. Other contestants were everywhere, and Maria couldn't help but notice how different they looked from her. Designer dresses, professional makeup, hairstyled to perfection. One girl walked past in heels that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. Another was doing vocal warm-ups with what looked like a private coach right there on the steps. Maria looked down at her navy blue dress and felt her confidence start to crumble. She'd thought she looked nice when she left home this morning. Now she just felt out of place. Inside, the theater was even more intimidating. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with angels and clouds. The floors were so polished, Maria could see her reflection. Everywhere she looked, people seemed to belong here in a way she didn't. "First time?" a voice asked. Maria turned to see an older woman with kind eyes sitting on one of the benches. She wore a simple pantsuit and had a contestant number pinned to her chest. "Is it that obvious?" Maria asked. The woman smiled. "Only because I remember my first time at one of these things. 20 years ago, and I was just as terrified as you look right now. Don't let all this fancy stuff get to you. Once you're on that stage, none of it matters. It's just you and your voice." Maria nodded, feeling slightly better. She got her contestant number and sat down to wait. The morning stretched on, as contestant after contestant was called. Some came back smiling, others in tears. One girl stormed out, muttering angrily about unfair judges. Finally, after what felt like forever, they called Maria's number. Her legs felt like jelly as she walked down the long corridor toward the stage. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, loud and fast. A stagehand opened a heavy door, and suddenly Maria was standing in the wings. Looking out at the massive auditorium, the stage was huge, bigger than her entire house back home. In front of it sat a long table where 3 judges watched the current performer. Even from where she stood, Maria could see them. The woman on the left was scribbling notes. The man in the middle looked bored, checking his watch. And on the right sat a man with silver hair and an expensive suit, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. That was Victor Constantine. Even Maria, who didn't know much about the classical music world, had heard of him. He was famous, a legend who had discovered some of the greatest opera singers of the last 30 years. He was also known for being tough, brutally honest, impossible to impress. The current contestant finished their song and hurried off stage. Maria heard Victor's voice boom through the speakers. Next, this was it. Maria stepped out onto the stage, and immediately the lights hit her so bright she had to squint. She couldn't see the audience, just row after row of dark seats stretching back into shadows. The judges' table was illuminated, though. She could see all three of them clearly now. Victor looked up from his papers as Maria walked to center stage. She saw his eyes scan her from head to toe, and something changed in his expression. His lip curled slightly, like he'd tasted something sour. "Name?" the woman judge asked, her voice more gentle. "Maria Santos," she said into the microphone, and her voice came out smaller than she'd hoped. "And where are you from, Maria?" The woman continued. "Santa Rosa. It's a small fishing village about 200 miles from here." Victor let out a short laugh. "Not a kind one." "A fishing village," he repeated, as if the words themselves were amusing. "And what made you think you could compete here?" Maria felt her face go hot. "I love to sing. I've been training with training." Victor interrupted, leaning forward now. "Who could possibly be training you in a fishing village? Did the fish teach you?" The other male judge shifted uncomfortably. The woman judge shot Victor a look, but he ignored her. "Let me guess," Victor continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "You sing at local festivals? Maybe at church? And someone told you that you had a nice voice, so you thought you'd come to the big city and become a star?" Maria's hands were shaking now. She didn't know what to say. Everything he was saying made her dream sound foolish, childish. "Look at you," Victor said, gesturing at her with his pen. "That dress, those shoes. Do you have any idea what kind of competition this is? This isn't some small-town talent show. This is a professional venue looking for professional talent. Opera is an art form that requires years of proper training, sophistication, culture. It's not something you can just pick up by listening to the radio." "I've been studying," Maria managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Studying?" Victor laughed again. "Where? In your fishing boat?" Some people in the audience gasped. Others remained silent. Maria could feel hundreds of eyes on her, watching this public humiliation unfold. The woman judge spoke up. "Victor, perhaps we should let her sing before we waste more time." Victor cut her off. "Fine. Go ahead, Miss Santos. What are you planning to sing for us today? Row, row, row your boat?" A few people in the audience laughed. Maria wanted to disappear. She wanted to run off that stage and never come back. Every instinct told her to leave, to save herself from further embarrassment. But then she thought about her mother, lying in that hospital bed. She thought about Rosa and the other waitresses who had scraped together their hard-earned money to give her this chance. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who had spent hours teaching her, believing in her when no one else did. Maria lifted her chin slightly. "I'm going to sing Casta Diva from Bellini's Norma." Victor's eyebrows shot up. For a moment, he looked genuinely surprised. Then he laughed harder this time. "Casta Diva? You're joking. That's one of the most difficult soprano arias ever written. Professionals with decades of training struggle with that piece." "I know," Maria said quietly. "No, I don't think you do know," Victor said, his voice turning sharp. "That aria requires perfect breath control, flawless technique, and an understanding of the emotional depth that I seriously doubt someone from a fishing village could possibly grasp. It's not just about hitting notes. It's about artistry, about refinement." He waved his hand dismissively. "But please, by all means, go ahead and try. Let's see how far you get before you crash and burn. Make it quick, though. We have real talent waiting." The woman judge looked like she wanted to say something, but she remained quiet. The other male judge was staring at his papers, clearly uncomfortable, Maria walked to the piano player and handed him her sheet music. Her hands were still trembling, but something had changed inside her. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Anger, maybe. Or a determination. Or maybe just the simple need to prove that she belonged here. As much as anyone else, the piano player looked at the music and then at Maria with surprise. "You sure about this?" he whispered. Maria nodded. She walked back to center stage and closed her eyes. She blocked out Victor's smug expression. She blocked out the fancy auditorium and the expensive dresses and everything that made her feel like she didn't belong. Instead, she thought about home. She thought about the sound of waves crashing against the shore. She thought about her mother's smile. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's weathered hands on the church. Organ keys. The piano began to play the introduction. Maria took a breath, and then she began to sing. The first notes came out soft, almost fragile. Maria's voice floated through the auditorium like a whisper, delicate and pure. In the audience, people leaned forward, straining to hear. Victor rolled his eyes and started to write something on his notepad, already preparing his dismissive comments, but then something happened. Maria's voice began to grow, not louder exactly, but deeper, richer. The soft whisper transformed into something else entirely, something that seemed to fill every corner of that massive theater without effort. It was the kind of sound that made people stop whatever they were doing and just listen. The woman judge's pen froze mid-word. The other male judge looked up sharply from his papers. And Victor, despite himself, stopped writing. Maria kept her eyes closed, lost somewhere else entirely. Her voice climbed higher, navigating the difficult runs and trills of the aria with a precision that seemed impossible. Each note was crystal clear, perfectly placed, and yet there was nothing mechanical about it. There was emotion in every phrase, a kind of raw honesty that couldn't be taught. Mrs. Rodriguez had told her once that the song was a prayer, sung by a high priestess begging the moon goddess for peace. Maria had practiced it dozens of times in that old church, imagining what it must feel like to pray so desperately for something. Now, standing on this stage after being torn down and humiliated, she understood. She wasn't just singing the notes, she was living them. The difficult coloratura passage was coming up, the part that made even professional sopranos nervous. It required hitting rapid-fire high notes with absolute accuracy while maintaining perfect tone. Maria had practiced this section until her throat hurt, till she could sing it in her sleep. She hit the passage flawlessly. Her voice danced through the notes like water flowing over stones, effortless and natural. In the front row, someone gasped audibly. Victor's pen had fallen from his hand. He sat completely still, staring at the stage with an expression that was hard to read. Shock, maybe. Or disbelief. His mouth had fallen slightly open. The aria built toward its climax. The high notes that required not just technical skill but courage. Maria could feel her heart pounding, but her voice remained steady. She thought about her mother, about the hospital bills, about Rosa and the other waitresses who believed in her. She thought about every time someone had made her feel small, every time she'd been told that girls from fishing villages didn't become singers. And she soared. The final high note rang out clear and pure, sustained perfectly, floating above the audience like something alive. Maria held it, her entire being focused on that single sound, and then let it fade gradually, gently. Like the sun setting over the ocean back home, the piano played the final notes, and then there was silence. Complete, total silence. Maria opened her eyes, suddenly terrified. Had she messed up? Had it been awful? The bright lights made it hard to see the judges' faces clearly. Then someone in the back of the auditorium stood up. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, the entire theater was on its feet, and the silence shattered into thunderous applause. Maria stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. People were clapping, some were shouting, others were wiping their eyes. The noise was deafening, overwhelming. She'd never heard anything like it at the judges' table. The woman judge was standing too, clapping hard, her eyes bright with tears. The other male judge was on his feet as well, shaking his head in amazement as he applauded. Victor remained seated, but he wasn't writing anymore. He wasn't smirking. He just sat there, staring at Maria like he was seeing her for the first time. The applause went on and on. Maria didn't know what to do, so she just stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, trying not to cry. After what felt like forever, the woman judge held up her hand, and slowly the audience began to quiet down. "Maria," the woman said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "That was absolutely extraordinary. In all my years of judging these competitions, I've rarely heard anything so beautiful. Your technique is flawless. But more than that, you have something that can't be taught. You have a gift." The other male judge nodded vigorously. "I agree completely. That was world-class. Truly world-class. You could sing in any opera house in the world with a voice like that." All eyes turned to Victor. He still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Maria could see him gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Finally, slowly, Victor stood up. The audience went quiet again. Everyone waiting to hear what the famous Maestro would say. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at Maria. Then he did something no one expected. He placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. "I owe everyone in this room an apology." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I have been judging these competitions for over 30 years. I have heard thousands of singers. I thought I knew talent when I saw it. I thought I could tell who belonged on stage and who didn't by looking at them, by knowing where they came from." Victor's voice grew stronger. "I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. What I just witnessed was not just technically perfect. It was transcendent. It was the kind of performance that reminds us why we love music in the first place." He looked directly at Maria. "Miss Santos, I judged you before you sang a single note. I dismissed you because of your dress, because of where you come from, because you didn't fit my narrow idea of what an opera singer should be. That was prejudice, pure and simple, and it was beneath contempt. The theater was so quiet you could hear people breathing. You have a gift that most singers would give anything for," Victor continued, "and I almost sent you away without hearing it. I almost robbed this audience of one of the most beautiful performances I have ever heard. The fault is entirely mine, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Maria felt tears streaming down her face now. She couldn't stop them. The woman judge cleared her throat. "Well, I think we can all agree that Maria is advancing to the next round. In fact, I'd like to give her a perfect score. All 10s. "Absolutely," the other male judge said immediately. "Perfect 10s for me as well." Victor nodded slowly. "And from me, though a perfect score hardly seems adequate," paused. "Miss Santos, after this competition is over, I would like to speak with you. I don't deserve your time, but I would like the opportunity to make amends. I would like to offer you my mentorship, if you would be willing to accept it." Maria couldn't speak. She just nodded, overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the last few minutes. "You are dismissed," the woman judge said gently. "And thank you. Thank you for that beautiful gift." Maria walked off the stage in a daze. The moment she was in the wings, her legs gave out, and she had to lean against the wall. A stagehand brought her water. The contestant who'd been kind to her earlier rushed over and hugged her tight. "I knew it," the woman said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I knew you had it in you." Maria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had to call Rosa. She had to tell Mrs. Rodriguez. She had to let her mother know. But first, she just stood there in the dim light backstage, her heart still racing, replaying every moment in her mind. She had come here expecting nothing. She had been torn down, humiliated, made to feel like she didn't belong. And then her voice had changed everything. The bus ride home felt completely different from the morning journey. Maria sat by the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness. Her perfect score sheet clutched in her hands like a precious treasure. She'd called her mother from the theater, and she could still hear the sound of her mama crying with joy on the other end of the line. But what happened next caught everyone by surprise. someone in the audience, had recorded Maria's audition on their phone. Not just her performance, but everything. Victor's cruel comments, his dismissive laughter, the way he'd mocked her dress in her hometown, and then the complete transformation when she sang. By the time Maria got home that night, the video was already spreading across social media. By morning, it had been viewed over 1 million times. By the end of the week, that number had climbed to 20 million. People were furious. Comments poured in from all over the country, calling out Victor's behavior. Musicians, teachers, and regular people shared their own stories of being judged unfairly, of being told they weren't good enough because of where they came from or how they looked. The video had struck a nerve. Major news outlets picked up the story. Small-town singer silences cruel judge, read one headline. The performance that changed everything, said another. Suddenly, Maria's face was everywhere. Rosa called her, screaming with excitement. You're famous. You're actually famous. Everyone in town is talking about you. But Maria didn't feel famous. She felt overwhelmed. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests. Reporters showed up at the diner. Someone even tried to interview her father while he was out on his fishing boat. 3 days after her audition, Maria received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, tired of talking to journalists. But something made her pick up. Santos, this is Victor Constantine. Maria's heart jumped. She hadn't expected to hear from him until the finals, which were still 2 months away. I've seen the video, Victor continued, his voice heavy. Everyone has seen it. I want you to know that I meant every word of my apology at the audition. But I understand now that I need to do more than apologize. I need to make real changes. He paused. I'm stepping down as head judge of the competition. It's the right thing to do. My behavior was unacceptable, and I need to take responsibility for it. Maria didn't know what to say. Part of her felt he deserved it. But another part, the part that had heard genuine remorse in his voice during the audition, felt almost sad. I still hope you'll consider allowing me to mentor you after the competition, Victor said. But I understand if you refuse. I know trust has to be earned. I don't know, Maria said honestly. I need time to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. And Maria, keep singing. The world needs to hear that voice. After he hung up, Maria sat on her bed, staring at her phone. Everything was happening so fast. Too fast, the next call came from the competition organizers. They wanted her to know that despite Victor stepping down, her advancement to the finals stood firm. All 3 judges had given her perfect scores, and that decision was final. But there was more. We've had an overwhelming response to your audition, the coordinator said. The finals are usually held in the Grand Theater, or we're moving to the National Concert Hall. It seats 3,000 people, and tickets sold out in 4 hours. 3,000 people. Maria felt dizzy just thinking about it. The weeks leading up to the finals were the strangest of Maria's life. She kept working at the diner because the bills didn't stop coming. But now, customers would ask for selfies while she poured their coffee. Local news crews showed up to film her wiping down tables. It was surreal. Mrs. Rodriguez helped her prepare for the finals. But even the old woman seemed amazed by what was happening. I always knew you were special, she said during one practice session. But I never imagined it would be like this. Neither did I, Maria admitted. Sometimes I wish I could go back to when it was just you and me in the church and nobody was watching. The world is watching now, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. But that doesn't change who you are or why you sing. Remember that. One afternoon, about 3 weeks before the finals, Maria was taking out the trash behind the diner when a sleek black car pulled up. The window rolled down, and there sat Victor Constantine. I'm sorry to ambush you like this, he said, but I needed to see you in person. Maria hesitated, then walked over to the car. I've spent the last few weeks doing a lot of thinking, Victor said. About my career, about how I've treated people, about the damage I've done with my arrogance. He looked older than he had at the audition, tired. I've been going through old videos, watching auditions from years past. Do you know how many talented people I dismissed? How many dreams I crushed because someone didn't look the part or didn't come from the right background? Maria didn't answer. Too many, Victor said quietly. Far too many. I told myself I was maintaining standards, preserving the integrity of classical music. But I was really just protecting my own prejudices. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Maria through the window. I've written to every major music institution I work with. I'm proposing new policies, blind auditions where possible. Scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds. Programs to bring classical music education to small towns and rural areas. Maria opened the folder and scanned the letters. They were real, already sent, with responses from several institutions expressing interest. I can't undo the damage I've done, Victor said. But I can try to make sure it doesn't keep happening. Your performance didn't just change my mind, Maria. It broke open something in me that needed to break, started to roll up the window, then stopped. One more thing. Whether you decide to work with me or not, I want you to know that I'm rooting for you. Not because of the publicity or because I want to redeem myself through you, but because you deserve every opportunity in the world, and I almost took that away from you. The car drove off, leaving Maria standing in the alley behind the diner. Holding the folder, that night she showed the letters to her mother. Her mama read through them slowly, then looked up at Maria. What do you think? She asked. I think people can change, Maria said. But I also think they have to prove it. Words are easy. Action is harder. Shh. You're wise for someone so young, her mother said, smiling. The week before the finals, Maria made her decision. She called Victor and told him she would accept his mentorship, but on a trial basis. If he showed the same prejudice or arrogance again, she would walk away. He agreed immediately. But she also made another decision. Win or lose, she was going to use whatever platform she had to help other singers like her. Kids from small towns who had talent but no opportunities. People who'd been told they weren't good enough because of where they came from. The night before the finals, Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the familiar sound of the ocean, thinking about how much had changed in just 2 months. The scared girl who'd stepped onto that stage barely existed anymore. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth. Tomorrow, she would sing in front of 3,000 people. Tomorrow, she would compete for a prize that could change her family's life forever. But tonight, she was just Maria from Santa Rosa, and that was enough. The National Concert Hall was unlike anything Maria had ever seen. The preliminary audition theater had been impressive, but this was something else entirely. Massive pillars rose up to a painted ceiling that seemed to touch the sky. The stage was so large that Maria felt like a tiny dot standing on it during rehearsal. 3,000 seats filled the auditorium. Every single one occupied. Maria peeked through the curtain during warm-ups and felt her stomach flip. All those people. All those eyes that would be watching her, but then she spotted them. Front row center section. Her mother sat in a wheelchair, still weak but smiling so bright it hurt to look at. Next to her was her father, wearing the only suit he owned, the one from his wedding day. Her brother sat there too, bouncing with excitement. And surrounding them were Rosa, Lucia, and the other waitresses from the diner, all dressed up. All beaming with pride, Mrs. Rodriguez sat at the end of the row, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes already misty. Seeing them all there made everything real. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who'd believed in her when she had nothing. There were 5 finalists total. Each would perform 2 songs, 1 classical piece and 1 of their own choosing. The competition had been fierce, with every contestant bringing their absolute best. Maria had heard some of them during rehearsals. They were incredible, professionally trained, technically flawless. She was scheduled to perform last. The show began, and Maria watched from backstage as the other contestants took their turns. A tenor from the capital city brought the audience to tears with his rendition of Nessun Dorma. A soprano who'd trained in Europe delivered a perfect performance that earned a standing ovation. A young baritone, with a voice like velvet, had people cheering before he even finished. Each performance was stunning. Each performer deserved to win. Maria felt her confidence wavering. These weren't people to be pitied or looked down on. These were serious artists who dedicated their lives to their craft. "You're going to be amazing," a voice said beside her. Maria turned to see the tenor who'd performed first. He smiled at her kindly. "I saw your audition video. We all did. You belong here just as much as any of us." "Thank you," Maria whispered. "Plus," he added with a grin, "you've already got the best story. Small-town girl shows up the famous judge. That's the kind of thing people remember." But Maria didn't want to win because of her story. She wanted to win because her voice deserved it. Finally, they called her name. Maria walked onto that enormous stage, and the applause was immediate and thunderous. People were already on their feet before she'd sung a single note. The viral video had made her the crowd favorite, but that only added to the pressure. The new head judge, a kind-faced woman named Patricia Chen, who'd replaced Victor, smiled encouragingly. "Whenever you're ready, Maria." Maria had chosen 2 pieces that meant something to her. For her classical selection, she'd picked Unio Babino Caro, a beautiful aria about a daughter pleading with her father. Every time she practiced it, she thought about her own papa, working on that fishing boat to support their family. The orchestra began, and Maria sang. She poured everything into it. Every early morning at the diner, every worry about her mother's medical bills, every moment of doubt and every moment of hope. The sweetness of the melody wrapped around the audience like a warm embrace. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the front row. Her father was openly crying, something she'd never seen before. For her second piece, Maria had made an unusual choice. Instead of another classical aria, she'd chosen a simple folk song from her village, one her grandmother used to sing while mending fishing nets. It wasn't sophisticated or complex. It was just honest and real. She sang it a cappella without any accompaniment. Just her voice, pure and unadorned, filling that massive hall. It was a song about the sea, about longing, about home. She sang it the way her grandmother had. The way generations of women in her village had sung it while waiting for their loved ones to return from the ocean. The simplicity of it was powerful. After all the technical virtuosity of the evening, this raw, honest moment hit differently. Maria wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just sharing a piece of her heart. When the last note faded, the silence lasted even longer than it had at her audition. Then the applause came like a wave, crashing over everything. People weren't just clapping. They were shouting, crying, holding each other. It was the kind of reaction that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with truth. The judges deliberated for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. The 5 finalists stood together backstage, holding hands, all of them too nervous to speak. Whatever happened, they'd all given everything they had. Finally, they were called back on stage. Patricia Chen stood at the microphone, holding an envelope. "This has been one of the most difficult decisions we've ever had to make," she said. "Every single finalist tonight demonstrated world-class talent. You should all be incredibly proud." She opened the envelope slowly. Maria felt her mother's eyes on her from the audience. She thought about that bus ride to the city, about Victor's cruel words, about everything that had led to this moment. "The winner of this year's National Voice Competition is... Patricia paused, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "Maria Santos." For a second, Maria didn't move. She couldn't process it. Then the other finalists were hugging her, crying and laughing, and the audience was on their feet again. And someone was putting flowers in her arms and a crown on her head. She looked out at the audience and found her family. Her mother was sobbing, her hands over her face. Her father had his arms around her, supporting her, both of them shaking with emotion. Rosa and the waitresses were jumping up and down like children. Mrs. Rodriguez just sat there, smiling peacefully, like she'd known all along. And in the back of the hall, standing by himself, was Victor Constantine. He wasn't sitting at the judge's table anymore, wasn't in a position of authority. He was just another person in the audience, clapping along with everyone else. When their eyes met, he nodded once, a small gesture of respect, and Maria nodded back. The next few hours were a blur. Interviews, photos, people congratulating her, the prize money check that would cover her mother's treatment for years. But the moment that mattered most came later. When the hall had mostly emptied out, Maria sat on the edge of the stage, her crown sitting beside her, just breathing. Her family had gone back to the hotel to rest. She'd promised to meet them soon, but she needed a moment alone. "Quite a night," a voice said. Victor stood at the bottom of the stage steps. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the spot beside her. Maria nodded, and he sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "I've been thinking about what to say to you," Victor began. "I've rehearsed a dozen different speeches, but the truth is simple. Thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to sing that day despite everything I said. Thank you for showing me how wrong I was. And thank you for giving me the chance to try to be better." "You hurt me," Maria said quietly. "What you said that day, it really hurt. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Victor looked down at his hands. "But you turned that hurt into something beautiful. You could have let my cruelty break you, but instead you broke through it. That takes a strength I'm not sure I possess." "What happens now?" Maria asked. "Now?" Victor smiled. "Now you change the world. Because that's what voices like yours do. They remind people of what's possible. They tear down walls that people like me spent years building." Over the next 2 years, Maria's life transformed in ways she'd never imagined. She performed at major concert halls across the country and eventually in Europe. Every performance sold out. Critics called her the voice of a generation. But Maria never forgot where she came from. She kept her promise to use her platform for others. With Victor's help and contacts, she established the Santa Rosa Music Foundation, providing free music education to children in small towns and rural areas across the country. They brought in professional teachers, provided instruments, and created opportunities for kids who never thought they'd have access to that world. Victor became one of the foundation's biggest supporters, not just with money, but with his time. He taught master classes, mentored young singers, and used his influence to open doors. He never asked for recognition or tried to make it about his redemption. He just worked quietly and steadily. To fix what he'd broken, Rosa and the waitresses became local. Celebrities in Santa Rosa, they loved telling everyone who would listen. We always knew she'd make it. Mrs. Rodriguez continued teaching in the old church. But now she had a waiting list of students. Parents from all over brought their children to learn from the woman who taught Maria Santos. Maria's mother recovered, strong enough to travel to some of her daughter's performances. Her father retired from fishing, though he still went out on the boat sometimes, just because he loved the sea. 3 years after that first audition, Maria returned to the Grand Theater, where it all began. She was the featured performer for a special gala, and she'd insisted that all the proceeds go to music education programs before the show. She stood on that same stage where Victor had tried to humiliate her, where she'd proven him wrong, where everything had changed. The theater was packed again, but this time she